Lucy Bennett pressed her back to the cold metal wall and tried to slow her breathing. The abandoned warehouses in New Haven Colony's industrial district were supposed to be empty, just rust, broken conveyor belts, and the echo of a war that had ended 2 years ago. But for 3 nights she'd heard it, deep, ragged breathing that didn't sound like a machine cycling on and off. It sounded like pain. She'd mentioned it at dinner. Grandma Rose had listened, nodded, and said it was probably old heaters shifting in the walls. Lucy knew better. Heaters didn't sound like they were suffering. So here she was, past curfew. A 12-year-old with a flashlight, a backpack, and the kind of courage that feels a lot like terror. Snow squeaked under her boots as she slipped through a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was colder than outside still, stale, and sharp enough to sting her nose. Her flashlight beam skated across concrete and shadow, a toppled crate, a line of old shipping rails, dust drifting like ash in the cone of light. Then she turned the corner, and her world stopped, chained in the center of the enormous space. Was a creature from ancient Earth nightmares, except it wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, massive, alive. A Draovian. They'd called them dragons in the war reports, because humans needed a familiar word for something that big and terrible. This one was easily 20 feet tall, scales the color of dark rubies, catching her flashlight and throwing it back in glittering fragments. Wings were spread wide, but pinned by thick chains that glowed with a sick, icy blue. More chains wrapped his neck, his legs, his tail, everywhere the metal touched. Frost crawled over his scales like mold. Lucy's knees wanted to fold. Every adult in the colony had a Draovian story. Ships ripped open, planets burned. Soldiers who fought like storms. The peace treaty had stopped the fighting, but it hadn't stopped the fear. She should have run. Instead, she stared at the way his chest rose and fell slow, uneven, like each breath cost him something precious. His eyes opened, gold, brilliant, too bright for this dead place. They locked on her as if he'd been awake the whole time, waiting. Go away, human child, he rumbled. The words weren't a roar. They were tired. The sound came through a small translator embedded near his throat, the device humming faintly. Your people have already thrown enough rocks and insults. I do not need more. Lucy's heart thudded so hard she felt it in her fingertips. But something in his gaze snagged her, held her still. Not hatred, not hunger. Hopelessness. She'd seen that look in her own mirror 2 years ago, after the transport crash that killed her parents. The look of someone who couldn't imagine a world getting better. She swallowed, forcing her voice to work. You're starving. His head tilted slightly, as if he'd misheard. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been bitter. I am Commander Rithrath of the Draovian Third Fleet. I do not accept charity from prey species. Prey species. The words lit a hot spark in Lucy's chest, stronger than fear. My name is Lucy, she said, sharper than she expected. Not prey. She swung her backpack around with shaking hands and pulled out a big thermos. Grandma, Rose's thermos, the one she used for long walks when she thought Lucy forgot to eat. "This isn't charity," Lucy added. "It's soup." The commander's nostrils flared as she unscrewed the cap. Steam rose immediately, curling through the cold air. The smell filled the warehouse: chicken, vegetables, pepper, warmth. It smelled like a kitchen with lights on and someone waiting for you to come home. She poured it into the cap bowl. Her hands trembled so badly some sloshed over the edge. Up close, she could see the injuries: scales blistered and rimmed with frost where the chains touched, burns that looked frozen at the same time, old wounds that hadn't healed, new ones forming. These chains weren't just restraints, they were punishment, constant and deliberate. Lucy set the bowl down and nudged it forward with her foot until it slid across the concrete and stopped within reach of his claws. Commander Reith stared at it like it might explode. Then his golden eyes shifted to her, really looked at her, studying her face as though she were a problem he couldn't solve. "Why?" he asked. Just one word, but Lucy heard the rest beneath it. "Why help me? Why aren't you running? Why aren't you doing what the war taught you?" She could have given him speeches about forgiveness, about how her parents used to say hate was heavy, about Grandma Rose insisting basic decency didn't come with exceptions. Instead, Lucy told him the simplest truth: because you're hungry, and nobody should be chained up like that, suffering like that, no matter what they did. Then she turned and walked back toward the door, every muscle screaming at her to sprint. Behind her came the scrape of claws on concrete. Silence. A long, heavy silence that made her wonder if she'd made the worst mistake of her life. Then his voice, softer than before. "Thank you, Lucy Bennett." She didn't look back. If she did, she might lose her nerve. She slipped out into the night and ran home with snow in her hair, and her heart doing something strange, something warm. She returned the next night with more soup, and the next. By the fourth visit, fear had changed shape. It didn't vanish exactly, but it became the kind of fear you feel climbing too high in a tree, sharp, alive, almost thrilling. Commander Reith was always waiting now, eyes following her the moment she entered, like he'd been worried she wouldn't come back. Tonight she brought two portions, one for him, one for her. She sat on an old wooden crate, her usual spot close enough to talk, far enough to leave space between them. "You never told me why you're here," she said, blowing on her soup. "The war ended 2 years ago. Everyone else went home. Why are you chained in a warehouse on a nothing colony?" Reith went still. Lucy had learned his silences weren't empty. They were choices. He was deciding what to trust her with. Finally he spoke, voice rough. "I was ordered to destroy a civilian colony. Traders and farmers, families. No military value. My admiral said burning their world would send a message." Lucy's stomach tightened. "What did you do?" "I refused." His claws dragged slowly across the concrete. "I locked my weapon systems. I told him true strength is knowing when not to use power. That terrorizing the helpless is not victory. It is cruelty." "That sounds right to me," Lucy said quietly. "To my people, it was treason." His chains clinked like breaking ice. They brought me here and bound me in quantum metal forged in dying stars. The cold burns forever. It is meant to teach that mercy is disease, that compassion makes you pray. Lucy stared at the chains. She'd been trying not to look too closely, like noticing them too much would make it worse. But tonight she saw something different. The glow was dimmer than the first day, the frost thinner in patches. That's not weakness, Lucy said. Firm now. It's strength. It's harder to show mercy than to follow orders. Reef made a sound that almost held amusement. Explain that to the Draovian High Council. Maybe they've been wrong for 3,000 years, Lucy muttered. And that earned her a soft rumble that, from him, passed as laughter. Over time, their conversations filled the warehouse with things that had no business living there. Jokes, memories, quiet. Lucy talked about school, about how the colony felt smaller after the war. Reef told her about stars over his home world, about the old stories his people used to tell warriors who protected the weak, leaders who sacrificed for their tribes, not for conquest. One night, he asked gently, "You mentioned losing your parents." Lucy's smile faded. "Transport crash," she said. "Engine failure over the northern mountains. They didn't make it." "I am sorry," Reef said, and his voice didn't sound like a formality. "Me too," Lucy whispered, hugging her knees. "Everyone keeps saying they were heroes, and maybe they were, but I didn't want heroes. I wanted my mom and dad." "That is not selfish," he said. "That is love." Lucy frowned at the word. "Sometimes it just feels like a weight, like something heavy in my chest that never goes away." "It never goes away," Reef agreed. "You learn to carry it." He was quiet a moment, then said, almost reluctantly, "I have a daughter, Kira. She was 7 when they took me." Lucy looked up. "Do you think she remembers you?" "I do not know. They will teach her I was a coward, that she should forget I existed." His pain made Lucy's throat tighten. She stood and moved closer, sitting beside his massive foreleg. Heat radiated faintly through his scales, like a banked fire. "She'll remember," Lucy said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "Kids remember more than adults think. She'll remember the father who chose right over easy." Reef lowered his head until it rested near her, eyes half-lidded. "Thank you," he murmured, "for the soup, for the company, for seeing me as something other than a weapon." On the 7th night, the colony was hit by the worst winter storm in years. Snow came down so thick Lucy could barely see 3 feet ahead. Wind clawed through her coat like it didn't exist. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves, but she clutched the thermos to her chest like it was a beating heart. When she forced the warehouse door shut behind her, Reef's voice came immediately different than usual. "Lucy, you should not have come. The temperature is deadly for humans. And Miss Thursday's soup night," she chattered, stomping snow off her boots. "No way." She tried to pour, but her hands shook too hard. Soup splashed. Her whole body trembled like it was breaking apart. Reef watched her, then said quietly, "Come closer. We are warm-blooded. I can help." Lucy hesitated for only a second before leaning against his side. Heat poured into her, not just warmth relief, Her lungs loosened, her muscles unclenched. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're like a giant heater. The chains are not as strong as they were," Reef said, careful. "They were designed to feed on isolation, on being alone with pain. But you changed that." Lucy looked at the chains. He was right. The blue glow had faded. The frost had retreated in places. "Is that because of me?" she whispered. "I believe so." Lucy's eyes stung not from the cold now, but from everything she'd been carrying, missing her parents, seeing Reef suffering, thinking about Kira growing up without her father, the unfairness of good people punished for being good. "I miss them," she said, voice cracking. "My parents. Everyone says time makes it easier. It doesn't. It just changes." Reef's chest rumbled gently under her cheek. "No," he said. "It changes. But it does not vanish." And then Lucy cried. She cried until her ribs hurt, until her face felt raw, until the storm outside seemed quieter compared to the storm inside her. She cried against the warm scales of an alien commander who had once been her people's nightmare and had become, somehow, a place she could be honest as she cried. The warehouse filled with a sound like singing metal. The chains began to glow differently. Blue shifted to purple. Purple warmed to pink. Pink turned red like a coal catching fire. The metal hummed, rising in pitch until it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Reef stiffened. "Lucy," he breathed, the chains look, through blurry eyes. Lucy watched cracks spider web across the glowing links. Light poured out bright, gold instead of cold blue, with a sound like 1,000 bells shattering. The quantum chains broke. Links fell to the floor and dissolved into silver dust. Shackles crumbled. The collar round his neck vanished like melting snow. Commander Reithrath of the Third Fleet stretched his wings for the first time in months. 40 feet of crimson power unfurled, filling the warehouse. He looked enormous and terrible and breathtakingly free. Lucy, exhausted, fell asleep against him before she could even process it. Reef curled his body around her, wings forming a shelter. Outside, alarms wailed, automated sensors screaming that the prison field had gone offline. Ships roared overhead. Lucy woke to the warehouse trembling. Shadows passed across skylights. Her stomach dropped. "They're coming," Reith said calmly, eyes fixed upward. "They will punish whoever interfered. Then we run," Lucy blurted. "I know tunnels, Lucy," he said gently, and she hated how kind he sounded. "I am 20 feet tall. There is no hiding me, and I will not make you a fugitive. In your own home." Before she could argue, the warehouse doors exploded inward. Draovian soldiers flooded in black armor, weapons glowing, movements precise as machines. Behind them strode a commander with scales so dark they were almost black, silver scars mocking him as a veteran. His eyes snapped to Reef, then to Lucy with open disgust. "Commander Reef," he said coldly, "the quantum bindings are broken. Explain." Lucy stepped forward before she could think. Her legs shook, but she lifted her chin. "I broke them." The commander stared, then barked a harsh laugh. "Impossible. I didn't use tools," Lucy said. voice steadier now because fear had run out of room in her body. Your chains fed on loneliness and pain. So I brought soup and conversation and friendship, warmth. The chains couldn't survive that. You're saying kindness broke imperial technology? He looked like he didn't know whether to be furious or insulted. Ruth's voice rolled through the warehouse. Commander Drake, you know I do not lie. This child speaks truth. Drake's claws flexed around his weapon. Then she is dangerous, and you remain a traitor. He raised his rifle. No. The shout came from the doorway. Grandma Rose charged in like a storm in a cardigan, eyes blazing. Behind her came Tom from down the street, limping hard. Then Dr. Helen Park. Then Mr. Jackson from the machine shop, then more colonists, dozens, pouring into the warehouse and placing themselves between Lucy and the rifles. You leave that child alone, Grandma Rose said, voice sharp enough to cut steel. She showed decency to someone suffering. If you think that deserves death, you can start with me. Tom stepped forward. That dragon saved my son. During the reactor emergency last year, flew into a meltdown zone and carried him out. Gentle as anything. Ruth's eyes widened slightly. The boy with red hair, Jake. Tom's mouth tightened. He remembered his name. Does that sound like a monster? Dr. Park added, furious. His treason was refusing to burn civilian families alive. That's conscience, not weakness, Drake's communicator chirped. He listened and his expression shifted to something Lucy had never expected to see on a Draovian officer. Fear. Understood, he said stiffly. The Empress is en route. As of 15 minutes, her orders. No one moves, no one leaves, no one dies. The warehouse went so quiet Lucy could hear her heartbeat. 15 minutes later, the air changed. Empress entered not the largest Draovian, but the one who made the world feel heavier. Deep purple scales that swallowed light, eyes like frozen sunsets. Every soldier dropped to one knee. Even Drake looked suddenly small. Show me, she commanded. Security footage bloomed into a hologram. Lucy bringing soup, talking, crying. The chains glowing, the moment they shattered into gold. The Empress watched without expression. When it ended, she turned those cold eyes on Lucy. You are either incredibly brave, she said, or incredibly foolish. Lucy's mouth was dry, but she answered anyway. My grandma says those are basically the same. A ripple went through the humans. The Empress's mouth curved not a smile, but something less sharp. And your grandmother? The Empress asked. Rose stepped forward, hand firm on Lucy's shoulder. Rose Bennett, she said. And yes, I taught her that bravery and foolishness only look different after you see how the story ends. The Empress studied Lucy again. Child, do you understand what you have done? I freed someone you wanted to punish forever, Lucy said. Someone who refused to kill innocents. You dare judge Draovian justice? Lucy's fear flared and then steadied, held up by the people behind her and the warmth of the dragon beside her. I dare judge any system that punishes compassion and rewards cruelty, she said. You made chains that feed on loneliness. You built an empire on being cold. And a 12-year-old with chicken soup broke it in 7 days. Silence. The Empress turned to Reef. You could have fled. I stayed, Reef said, meeting her gaze. Because she freed me. Because she reminded me I am more than a weapon. She gave me hope. The Empress walked to the silver dust where the chains had been. She let it crumble through her claws. For 3,000 years, she said slowly, we have taught strength above all. Emotion is weakness. Mercy is disease. Her gaze returned. To Lucy. What was in the soup? Lucy blinked. Chicken, vegetables, noodles, salt, pepper. She hesitated, then added, quietly, love. Grandma says that's the secret ingredient. Love, the Empress repeated, as if tasting an ancient poison. We removed that word from our language 600 years ago. Maybe that's why you needed chains that feed on loneliness. Lucy said, because you forgot connection is what makes people strong. For a long moment, the Empress said nothing. Then impossibly she lowered herself. An Empress knelt before a human child. Lucy Bennett. She said formally, you have proven the foundation of our empire is fear, not strength. She rose, turning to Reef. Commander Reef, I restore your rank. You will serve as the first Draovian ambassador to humanity. You will teach what this child has taught you. Reef looked stunned, like someone had handed him a sky. And you, Lucy Bennett, the Empress continued, our named friend of the Draovian Empire. You will come to our home world as an honored guest. You will teach our children that compassion is not weakness. Lucy's brain tripped over the words. You want me to teach dragon kids? Yes, the Empress said, eyes warming by a fraction. Any human brave enough to lecture an Empress about justice is the kind of strength my people need. She paused. One condition, you bring your grandmother and her soup recipe. I intend to understand this love ingredient. 3 months later, Lucy stood in a bright classroom on the Draovian home world, surrounded by young dragons bigger than her, eyes wide with curiosity. Grandma Rose stood nearby with a pot simmering and a look that said, I told you soup fixes things. At the back, Commander Reef stood with Kira beside him, 10 years old now, staring at Lucy like she was a legend. A small dragon raised a claw. Is it true you broke quantum chains with soup? Not just soup, Lucy said, pouring steaming samples into cups. Soup plus something more important. What? Another asked. Leaning forward, Lucy smiled, thinking of a freezing warehouse, a golden-eyed prisoner, and a choice that changed everything. I chose to care, she said, even when everyone told me not to. Emotions aren't weakness. They're what connect us, and connection is stronger than isolation. A young dragon sipped and blinked, surprised by warmth. That's the point, Lucy told them. Real strength is having the courage to stay warm in a cold universe. To be kind when cruelty is easier. To make room for someone else's pain and not turn away. Behind her, Reef nodded once, pride shining in gold. Lucy had walked into an abandoned warehouse with a thermos of chicken soup and a stubborn refusal to let suffering be normal. She hadn't planned to change an empire. But maybe change never starts with plans. Maybe it starts with one small act of compassion, one bowl of soup, offered to someone everyone says you should hate. Sometimes that's enough to melt chains that were supposed to last forever.